Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach, and welcome to our episode this week, episode 127, Deciding What to Work on When Projects Keep Coming at You. I'm going to go ahead and share a screen for those of you that are on YouTube and watching this on YouTube, but I will describe what's going on for audio listeners as well. So where the impetus for this episode came from is that, like all semesters and sessions of writing never goes the way that we schedule it. And I know I've had some beautifully optimistic episodes about what I'm planning to get accomplished in the summer, and I've actually gotten one writing project already accomplished in the getting to the end of May of 2023. But as with all things with writing, we're always in a cycle. We're always submitting something and waiting to hear something. And then sometimes there's revisions required and we have to drop everything and do those because there's a time deadline. But then there's this new call for papers that comes out and this new, maybe this other project that looks really interesting. And I wanted to let you see a little bit of the decision-making process I did when I realized this was starting to happen. So I do have slides for this one, but I will walk through what the things are on the slides. And so, this episode, I think, it's an episode that kind of describes one moment in time in my academic writing journey as a professor, but this is something that is ongoing. Writing projects will just keep coming. So it's not a singular moment this particular semester. It could, this could happen to me again in 2 days with something else. But I wanted to just provide the snapshot in time and how I just sort of decide what am I supposed to be doing right now to make the most of that May push that I talked about in a previous episode. And I'll link to that in the show notes. So as a quick review of what I personally am working on, and this might give you some idea to just give yourself some 5 categories to decide what's happening with your writing projects. So I'm a big fan of taking stock of all the writing projects you might have going on at any one time. But for this particular episode, I made 5 categories. I made a completed list of things that I set out to work on this summer that are finished. I have a just thrown at me category. I have a likely coming soon category. So I'm just looking ahead to something I know that's coming but isn't here yet. I have an on the list category, and this is just projects that are on the list. They're active writing projects that I want to complete during summer of 2023. And then I also have a coming up category, which is something that's not an active project right now. It's not anything that is due for me until the fall, but I know it's coming and it is something with a hard deadline. So one of the things that helped me thinking through those 5 categories, so the completed category, the just thrown at me category, likely coming soon, on the list, and then coming up, is that all of these have different time sensitivities, if we want to call it that. So some of these things are things I want to do but don't have a set deadline. Some of these are things I owe somebody else. Some of these are preemptive because if I don't do them now, they're going to cause a problem later. So another episode I recently did was one on sabbatical planning. So I have some things on the list this summer that have to get accomplished this summer for me to be able to go on sabbatical in the spring of 2024. So let's just kind of walk through real quick what these categories are and how I decided what the heck I'm doing with some of these things kind of entering into the mix. So this summer, one of my things I wanted to accomplish was completing another article for Inside Higher Education. I did write some guest pieces for them a while back. I liked doing it. And then during the pandemic, I had to kind of cut projects that I like to do, but I couldn't make the room for. So I did do that. I knocked out that article. That was one of the first things I knocked out in May of 2023. So that will be published in Inside Higher Ed, possibly by the time this episode is out. So you can check it out if you want to. It's all on research impact. So that was one that I wanted to do. I could check it off the list. One that just got thrown at me were revisions for an edited collection I'm doing with 2 colleagues where we had written and edited, or we had figured out how to do an edited collection together. I had already written my piece for it. They had already written their piece for it. We had other pieces submitted to it, and then we submitted it to a press, and we got back reviews that were positive but wanted some revisions, which is fine. But those revisions, that feedback just came back to us about 2 weeks ago. And in the short term, we just kind of combed through the feedback, figured out what do we want to do. We kind of had an initial look at it, but our plan is to meet just a couple days away from when this episode will be recorded. So it's something that I know I need to do something about. So positive reviews are positive reviews. That's great. But it is something that I'm not going to be able to make all the revisions really quickly and get it back to a journal or something like that. So an edited collection, just like a book project, sometimes the things that have to happen are going to take some time. So normally I am about dropping everything for a revise and resubmit. And I think I might even have an episode on that. If I do, I will link to it in the show notes. But this is not a scenario where I can do that. So I can't just drop everything, try to get some revisions in and give it back to the press. Also, because this relies on other chapter authors. So I have some, obviously this is an edited collection. We have chapters written by different authors. We have to give them some time to do some of the things that need to be done. So that just came in. So that's something that's now lurking on my radar that I can't wait indefinitely. We had some positive reviews. So I definitely don't want to wait for as long as like 6 months, but it is something that now has to become an active project this summer. If that particular press didn't respond back to us till August 15th, I wouldn't be worrying about them right now. But because they did come back to us and, it's now May of 2023, in my mind, something like that, I would want to get rid of in 3 months. I would want to make sure that I have that finished. So that's something that just came in. I'm thinking about it. I'm like, oh, I got to do something about it. Something else that is likely coming soon is that I mentioned I worked on this book for time management for academic moms. I've had it around for a long time. I had to do some revisions for it. I've already talked about how I've done that in the previous episodes. I believe it was in the Use Asana to manage a big revision. So if you want to check that episode out, you can. But that one, I should hear any day now on how those revisions went. And so that, no matter what happens with that manuscript, that's going to require some decision making and some work. I don't have it yet, but it's likely coming back within the next 4 weeks. So it's just on my horizon. And why I'm putting this out in an episode is that a lot of these things, you have to kind of stay on top of all the timelines at once. And so for me to just realize, hey, I don't have that right now. So I kind of have this window not to worry about it, but it's not indefinite. And when it does come in, that project will need attention immediately. So I know no matter what happens, when that one comes back, I'm going to have to drop everything I'm doing to get back to what needs to happen for that. So then 2 other categories I had. One was my on the list category of things I wanted to work on this summer, which I'll come back to. But I also have a category just called coming up. And coming up could be some of the things on the summer list that I don't get to, or I don't, obviously summer, you're very optimistic about how much writing you can actually do. I will put a link to our summer playlist that just talks about some things about summer and trying to make the most of that unique time. I'll stick that in the show notes too. But one of the things I know is coming up that has a hard deadline, and it's something that I don't have written at all yet. I have, I've pitched a proposal for it, but I don't have anything for it yet. So one of this piece is an edited collection chapter that I'm doing for someone else's collection that's due November 1st. It's a pretty short chapter. I can't remember how many words it is. It is not a full-length chapter of like 25 pages. It might be something like 8 to 10 pages. But I want it on my radar right now, even though I don't have to worry about it until the fall, because that's the first thing that I know about with a deadline in fall of 2023. So I really like to think through my semesters, if at all, or the way I think about the academic year in writing. Right now, I'm kind of working in 3 chunks: fall, spring, summer. I used to like to do 4 chunks where I had fall, spring, summer 1 before July 4th, the holiday in the US, and then summer 2, which was after the July 4th holiday. But for me, it's just worked out better that I just think of summer as one block. So going back to those things on the list, I had 5 things on that list. One was the article for Inside Higher Education, which is now completed. But the other 4, one was finishing a book proposal for my 3rd book on academic writing project management that I've been wanting to do for a long time. That's sort of my dream project at the moment. So I want that proposal done this summer. I am going to do it this summer. But I also have a couple other things. I have an article on grad students writing as new faculty members that is now half written. probably more than half written, that is already, let's figure out how to say it. Like, it's already, I have a journal already interested in that piece that wants it. I just need to finish it. It's half done. So I need to finish that because I needed to get some new feedback from my participants because of some things about the pandemic and some things about their new positions. So I basically needed to get another round of interview questions answered, which I now have and need to work into that draft. So that's something I know I have to do. I still need to do all my IRB application for some of the project that I'm working on with interviewing faculty writers for my sabbatical in 2024. So that's some data I want to work with while I'm there, but I've got to get all that IRB stuff done. I have to make sure that I get the faculty participants, I have to get them interviewed sometime in the fall, which means I need to do the back work to get the application for institutional research and all the protocols there. I need to get those completed in the summer. And then just also that was not on the list on the summer, but it went on my list, is that I now have a presentation on June 7th about collaborative writing with faculty members. So, if you're listening to this, you're probably tired. I would need a cup of coffee after listening to all those projects, but that might be what your writing situation looks like. You might have a conference presentation you have at the end of the summer. You might still have one in May that's in 2 weeks and you need to do slides. You have that dissertation chapter that really needs to become an article. You might have another article that's half written with somebody else. You might have a revise and resubmit that comes in. So I talked about dropping everything for a revise and resubmit. In that case, that's a time that you want to take care of it. So thinking about decision-making for a second, there's a couple things that I ended up doing. One that I would say, though, just thinking about whatever happens, no matter what happens when I think in terms of academic priorities, if it is a revise and resubmit that I can take care of myself, and it will keep a project moving towards completion. So we always talk about movement and completion for writing projects. So you always want to be doing something on them and you always want to be moving them to completion. If that's a revise and resubmit and that's something that comes in and it's something that I can do alone, that will always be my first priority. And I will drop everything else aside from, if I have a presentation, I have to give like the next day presentation sometimes because they're very time sensitive. I can't do it. But other projects I will immediately just stop or pause on and then do that revise and resubmit and get rid of it. So I mentioned the likely coming soon that I'm going to get some decisions on that book manuscript on the time management and parenthood, that when that comes, everything will stop. Everything except for presentations, and I will immediately switch gears and start working on that. And for me, that has been a good way to make sure I finally close the loop and get projects out and get published. So one of the reasons clients come to us at Defend, Publish, and Lead is because they haven't closed that loop yet. They have the big list of all the writing things, but they don't really have them prioritized in any kind of way. And they don't have a system where they decide, what am I working on right now? So I mentioned in one of our episodes, it's called Your Writing Project Mix. I'll also link to that one. We'll have lots of links in these show notes. But one of the things in deciding on your writing project mix for any given time period, whatever you decide, is you decide what the rules are. And the rule is, at least for me, is a revise and resubmit, if it's a solo one, supersedes everything else. So thinking back to that, I know that's coming. And so in my mind, it is a little bit of pressure because I know that's coming. I know that these revisions for this edited collection were just thrown at me. I'm now starting to feel that pressure that, I've got a lot of projects that are starting to kind of all hit me around the same time. And so what I did, and this is what I'm showing on the screen, but I will describe for audio only listeners. The first thing I did was I made an Asana board for the revisions for that edited collection. I didn't have one before because I didn't think it was necessary. I kind of knew what I was doing. I had already written my piece. I've mentioned using Asana for project management. I think Trello, or if you just have a chart, where you track where all your writing projects are and what you're doing, all those things are great. I think just having a space where you're recording where all your writing projects are is a spot to just kind of keep track of all this stuff. So one thing I did was I thought through, okay, so here's something that just got thrown at me, right? The revisions for this edited collection. I read through that feedback, and then what I did was make an Asana board for this project. So basically it's just a space to hold all my little tasks of what I have to do. And this morning I spent 3 hours just brainstorming and dropping everything into this Asana board were things that I knew had to be done for this project as I was reading the feedback. And so for me, that was really helpful because one of the things I like about Asana, and you could do this in Trello or any of those other project management spaces, but I like it because I can list what it is I want to do, but there's enough room and there's no character limit where I can actually start doing it right there in the project management system. So, I've talked about Asana a lot. If you want to ever work with me personally on like a Trello or an Asana board or something like that, you want to get your own system set up, I'm happy to do that with you. You can contact me at Christine@defendandpublish.com or look in the show notes for our contact information. So we do writing coaching on this. This is actually becoming a bigger part of our business because people are wondering how to think through, how do I set one of these up? What do I know, I'm doing with my tasks? How do I organize them and so on? But for me, I like it because I'm actually writing in there. So for example, what I ended up doing in this particular morning was I know something I have to write in the introduction to this collection is something about what the collection is doing and what it's offering. So I started making a list of the things that it offers just in my Asana board. So those of you on screen can see me circling it right now. Audio listeners only, you can definitely go back and check this out on YouTube if you want to see it. But that was one way for me to just get a grip on the idea that, oh, this project flew into all my other projects that I'm doing. How am I going to remember what I'm supposed to be doing on that thing while I'm working on these other things? So for me, sometimes that means during a writing session, practically, I have to take a time out and just get a grip on what's going on with this specific project. That doesn't mean I'm going to do anything about this particular project right now. So I mentioned I don't have an indefinite amount of time, but I just want to be prepared for a meeting in a couple days with my co-editors. So that means I could do some brainstorming now and not worry about this particular project for 5 days until that meeting happens. And so that's what I did. The other thing that I did was I made a quick list of priorities to just figure out what am I doing about the writing part? How am I using my writing time? So at this point, I have about a week and a half left in May of 2023. So what I ended up doing was figuring out what am I doing in just my next 2 writing sessions before I have a meeting with co-editors. So one of the things that I'm doing is I'm figuring out some revisions that need to happen in that edited collection, which I've started doing in that Asana board. I've started them today. I know that's not all of them because I want to think about it a little bit and I need to read some stuff. So that will all be something I do in the next 2 writing sessions. But I also know, hey, that presentation's coming up June 7th. It's not super far away now, where it's about 2.5 weeks out. So one thing that I have not done a podcast episode on, but it will be your very next episode because I realized I did this when I started making the slides for this one. But sometimes I'll do something I call slow working, where especially with conference presentations, where I might work on a slide a day or a writing session for a conference presentation, where I just very slowly kind of keep that in my ticker and I worry about that, work on it or worry about it when I have a, half hour open here and there. So I know that that's going to be a priority for the next 2 writing sessions, that I'm going to work on those revisions for the edited collection. But once I'm finished, then I'm going to start that slow working on those slides. After that meeting with my editor or my co-editors, which for me would be kind of the last week of May, I will still keep slow working on the slides till they're done. But then I'm also going to do a writing push to expand the edited collections introduction. That's my specific piece, and try. I don't know that I will finish, but I will try, because now I'll know what I'm doing after talking with my co-editors. I'm going to try to get it completed by June 6th. So at this time, when this episode comes out, we might be hitting right around that time. So you're kind of getting this in live. We always record a couple weeks before. So this might be happening like in live time, but that's how I'm thinking about it. So, I'm going to push to try to get it completed by that time. And why I'm using that deadline as my marker, which would be about 2 weeks after I meet with the co-editors to get my part completed. the reason I'm rushing for that particular day is, for one, for that kind of a project, I don't like to take longer than 2 weeks. Like it's something I could knock out in 2 weeks. I am going to do it in two, but I know after that I do have a vacation in there. So not all the days I'm going to be gone, but I'm deliberately taking off a 2 week vacation, or mostly almost a 2 week vacation from work. So that's just kind of a time that, we've got some things set aside, and I purposely am not going to be at the office. I'm purposely not writing unless it happens, it just happens to work out. So I'm not planning for writing days during those times. So I know I'm going to do that, and then thinking through what will happen after June 18th, which is about the time that I'll be, ready to start working again. I know I'll have to finish that introduction for the edited collection if it's not complete. But my next move then is to go back to that article on grad students as faculty writers. Since it's half written, I really wanted to initially work on some of my stuff for my third book on the writing project management, because that's the one I want to do. That's the one I'm all excited about. It's a new project. But since I have that other article half finished, and it also affects my participants who I was writing about, I really want to get that one done. So I kind of changed what I'm doing in the summer. And so I know this is a little bit of a longer episode, but I think thinking through a faculty member's decision-making process, like how I know what it is I'm working on and when to work towards completion, hopefully this shows you. So thinking about this, or as a small recap, what should happen if this goes according to plan, what should happen is that I should have, by the time we get to I guess this would be close to the end of June, I should have that Inside Higher Education piece published. I should have the edited collection introduction finished. I should have the presentation that's on June 7th on faculty collaboration finished. And then ideally, I should be working on that book that I really wanted to work on in May. So I'm about a month behind on that particular project, but I've got these other things that got completed in the meantime. And this may juggle again. So this is what happens when somebody or a project jumps into the mix. So something comes in that maybe you weren't expecting. I know in another episode I talked about dropping everything to do address a call for papers that looked really good, and how I just kind of knocked it out in one writing session. This is the decision-making process that sometimes happens. So I encourage you to really think about this week. What are the categories you have? What's something you're actively working on? That could be 2 or 3 things at one time. What's something that's not, you don't have it yet, but it's likely going to hit you soon. If you just got slammed with a new writing project, good news, bad news, whatever it is, how are you going to work it in? Is it something like a call for papers that if you don't respond to it in 3 days, you can't do it anymore? Is there a deadline like that? Use those things to make your decisions. And then finally, I mentioned I was doing a presentation on June 7th. I just wanted to say very quickly what that was. I know I've talked about this before, but Textbook and Academic Authors Association is one of our podcast sponsors, but I do workshops for them along with many other faculty coaches and writing productivity coaches. And so the workshop I'm doing on June 7th, if anybody is interested in something similar at their institution, one of the things that we offer workshops on are collaborative writing projects and how to actually work through those as a faculty member. And what I'm doing that presentation at an institution, but I also do ones on time management and some other things. So that is a presentation that I need to plan for. I need to be ready to present that at a university. So it's a little bit different than maybe a conference presentation per se, but it is a presentation nonetheless. And I wanted to make sure that I said something about this just being a resource. So if anybody's interested in doing any of the virtual workshops from TAA, you can look them up. There's a link for virtual workshops. And it's honestly a great resource because they work it out that faculty members who go to one of those workshops, if you hire them to do one, they give institutional memberships as part of the workshop fee, and it's not very expensive to host. It's just $1,000 to have the workshop hosted by your institution, but then you get institutional memberships for faculty. I forget how many, but it's quite a few, and faculty can use all of the things in the Textbook and Academic Authors Association for a whole year. So it's a pretty good deal. And actually, I need to talk to my own institution about doing that. So hopefully this episode helps. And if there is anything that you have questions about in terms of writing projects or academic decision making. I also want to say that Defend, Publish, and Lead can help with some of that. Many of our coaching calls, sometimes just 30 minutes or an hour, people just want to talk through that. They say, I have these 8 things. I have no idea how to just prioritize and figure out a strategy for working through them. If that's something that you're interested in, please come back to us, and happy writing.